La Paz, Bolivia. More than 2 days after Bolivia's president resigned under pressure, the senator who is next in the line of succession stood before the National Assembly on Tuesday and said she was seizing control of the country, which had been left rudderless. I assume the presidency immediately and will do everything necessary to pacify the country, said the senator, Janine A+or-Ez Chavez. Ms. A+or-Iz's statement was the latest dramatic turn after President Evo Morales stepped down on Sunday and accepted an asylum offer in Mexico. He arrived there Tuesday morning and defiantly vowed to return, denouncing his ouster as a coup. Fireworks echoed across La Paz and in other major cities as many Bolivians welcomed Ms. A+or-Iz's declaration, which could herald the end of the political standstill that has gripped the nation. But it was not immediately clear whether her claim to power would be accepted by Mr. Morales's supporters in the legislature, the population at large or the military. Mr. Morales's abrupt departure came after the armed forces sided with protesters who had accused him of rigging an election to stay in power. The resignation vaulted Bolivia into a leaderless power vacuum. Some political and legal analysts said the steps taken by Ms. A+or-Ez and the assembly members present for her announcement were extraordinary but necessary, because members of Mr. Morales's party had boycotted the scheduled session at which they were to select a new president. A+or-Ez, along with congressmen of both chambers, are abiding by their constitutional duties and are taking measures to secure the constitutional succession of power, said Carlos Arameo Ra+or-Ez, a Bolivian political scientist. Earlier on Tuesday, in a rapid-fire series of tweets, Mr. Morales had urged members of his coalition to continue blocking efforts to nominate an interim leader. He congratulated the legislators for not showing up at the legislative session at which his resignation would have been formally accepted, and Ms. A+or-Ez recognized as the country's interim leader. He said they were acting with unity and dignity to reject any manipulation by the racist, coup-mongering and traitorous right-wing This frustrated many of the legislators who wanted to move forward. Today, they have to understand that the most important is Bolivia, not Evo Morales, one opposition lawmaker, Luis Felipe Dorado, said of the presidentia's supporters. Evo Morales is gone from the country, but they continue to obey him, not the will of the country. A former media executive and leader of a conservative coalition, Ms. A+or-Ez said before she declared herself president that she would lead a transition focused on selecting an honest electoral commission and holding elections as soon as possible. This is simply a transitory moment, she said earlier Tuesday. There is an urgency. On Monday, as looting and violence spread across several cities, Ms. A+or-Ez at first appeared rattled, sobbing as she called for calm. But by the evening, she was projecting strength, and demanding that the army accept the National Policia's call to jointly patrol the streets of La Paz to restore order. The army quickly responded, sending troops into the streets and setting up defensive positions around vital infrastructure like electricity and waterworks. By Tuesday morning, the streets of La Paz were tense, but largely quiet. Bolivians remained sharply divided in their political views and in their hopes for the future. Mr. Morales, who was first elected in 2006, was the first indigenous president of Bolivia, where about 2/3 of the population are of indigenous descent. In the Plaza San Francisco in La Paz, street vendors, most indigenous, overwhelmingly expressed support for him. Evo was the best president we ever had, said Rosario C+or-Ain, 39, who was selling individually wrapped candies. Now we have no more hope. Joe's copyright Ariel Blanco, the 25-year-old owner of a stationery store 2 blocks from the legislature, said he was thankful for Mr. Morales's achievements, chief among them, tackling the racism that the indigenous had suffered for centuries. My grandmother couldn't walk into a bank in her indigenous clothes until Evo became president, he said. Now she can, and that won't change. But he said Mr. Morales went too far in bending the rules of democracy. The Venezuelan and Cuban models Donna T work overtime, he said. Down the street from Mr. Blanco's store, Victor Huancalo, a 24-year-old computer science university student, stood guard at a makeshift barricade intended to keep supporters of Mr. Morales from approaching the legislature. He was hopeful that new elections would be held in a few months, he said, and that a transparent president who is not corrupt will emerge, not like what we had over the last 14 years. On Tuesday morning Mr. Morales was met by Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's foreign minister, at the presidential hangar of Mexico City's main airport. In comments to the news media, Mr. Morales remained defiant, vowing to continue his involvement in politics and his fight for social justice, Bolivia's indigenous populations and the poor. Our sin is that we are ideologically anti-imperialist, but this coup won't make me change ideologically, he said. Mr. Morales, who was flanked by Bolivia's former vice president, Álvaro García Linera, also thanked his hosts, the Mexican government. We are very grateful to the President of Mexico, because he saved my life, he said. Mr. Morales left office after weeks of growing unrest over a disputed presidential election and after the military indicated it would support the people in the streets who were calling for him to step down. In his audio message, which was released by the Mexican news media and broadcast in Bolivia, Mr. Morales called on the military to stop the massacre. A photograph draped in a Mexican flag aboard a Mexican Air Force plane. Mr. Morales also told his supporters, we'll work together for Bolivia. At a news conference on Tuesday morning, Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's foreign minister, said his government had encountered numerous difficulties in securing permission to land its plane in Bolivia to retrieve Mr. Morales, and in getting cooperation from other countries in the region to facilitate the plane's return to Mexico with the former Bolivian president aboard. Among the obstacles, he said, the government of Peru had forbidden the plane to land on Peruvian territory to refuel during its return trip, and Ecuador had blocked passage over its territory, forcing the plane to take a path over the Pacific Ocean. That further delayed Mr. Morales's arrival in Mexico City. Kirk Semple contributed reporting from Mexico City.